You just announced the new S1R2. What took you guys so long?
You're watching CineD, supported by B&H and CVP.
Hi guys, I'm Johnny from CineD, and I'm here with Matt Frazer from Panasonic. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well, Johnny. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much. And before we dive into this interview presenting the new camera that you just announced, what is your position at Panasonic?
Yeah, some people probably don't know me. I'm Matt Frazer. I work in the United States. I work in business development, but I also do product planning as well. So those are my two roles at Panasonic.
So first of all, congratulations. You just announced the new S1R2. I have to ask, what took you guys so long?
Well, yeah, so the S1R Mark II, it took some time to develop because we have very clear opinions on what a hybrid camera should be capable of. And Panasonic's very focused on both video and stills capabilities. So what we did is we wanted to make sure we had a sensor that could produce high enough resolution to be considered an R camera, but also had fast enough readout speeds to be able to support features like a very, very minimal crop or no crop 4K 60 frame mode, be able to offer 120 frame per second in 4K. And so at the same time, we wanted to make sure we weren't taking a step backwards in dynamic range. And so until that sensor was developed, it just took us some time to get there.
But you know, Matt, actually, when I think about it, before even jumping and talking about the new camera, there's one question that I have to ask, because so many people are waiting for the S1H Mark II or II. What's about this camera? Are we going to see this anytime soon?
I'm sure at some point there'll be a replacement for the S1H. We have to kind of do things in a sequence. The S1 series was the next most logical cameras to be replaced, and so starting with the S1R made the most sense because the sensor was ready for it.
Now, back to the new S1R2. So this is your first 8K camera. Why this took so long to produce an 8K camera?
Well, again, I think what it came down to is that we're not just focused on being able to do 8K video, which, a lot of cameras can do 8K at 30 frames per second. Ultimately, we wanted to make sure we had a sensor that could also give benefits above and beyond what an S5 II is capable of when it comes to like 5.8K or 4K video. And so we wanted to make sure we had a sensor that could support 8K, but also would give you 4K 60, would also be able to do 4K 120, and frankly, 5.8K 60. And so that ultimately became the driving force behind this product's development.
When I look at the camera specifications, it's mind-blowing like any other modern camera. So let's really concentrate, and if you can please share with me and of course with the audience some main highlights from the specification sheet.
So to be clear, this is an extremely new camera from Panasonic. If you have an S1R and you're looking for a replacement, there's very few things that are the same. In fact, really the viewfinder is about the only thing that's the same from the S1R. So yes, we're going to a 44.3 megapixel sensor, so you're going to get extremely high resolution photos, and this is what facilitates being able to do 8K video at up to 30 frames per second. This camera will also be able to do 5.8K video at up to 60 frames per second. Clearly 4K video, and these are all 10-bit codecs, up to 120 frames per second for 4K video. In terms of the memory card slots, the camera now includes a CFexpress along with an SD card slot. This now facilitates the ability to do 5.8K ProRes RAW internal recording. And then obviously we have a whole suite of ProRes options as well. So 5.8K ProRes is also available in the camera without being RAW as well. The camera is also going to be able to do a new way of adjusting exposure for Panasonic, which is we've added false color, which is new for us. And one interesting tidbit on false color, this will also work for photography as well. And so we think that photographers will find this to be very useful for setting exposure, not just video shooters. Outside of that, the camera will be able to work with our XLR2, which means this will be the first full-frame camera on the market that we know of that's able to do 32-bit float audio. This means you have 4 channels of 32-bit float. That would be at 48 kilohertz, or you could do 2 channels at up to 96 kilohertz. And then there's a whole slew of usability improvements. We've done away with the mode dial that has the little photo, the movie camera symbol. We've now added an actual switch that switches you between photo, video, and slow and quick mode. This adds a whole slew of just ease of life benefits. The camera literally becomes completely separated. It's a photo camera. There's no video menus. If it's in video, there's no photo menus. And even little details like all the C settings and everything can be completely customized by use.
That sounds a lot, and let's dive into it. But you mentioned the EVF. Is that the same EVF resolution that you have in the S9 camera?
I was like,
This is just a wishful thinking. Yeah, I really hope that you will have the same form factor, very similar camera, but with a built-in viewfinder. I was joking, Matt. I was not trying to put in. Yeah. Okay. You mentioned internal RAW recording in HQ. What is the maximum resolution and the frame rate that you can actually record internally in RAW HQ?
yeah, so we'll do a window. It's 5.8K, and it can do it up to 30 frames per second. Clearly, you also have 23.976, and you also have True 24.
Is it supporting the version for CFexpress cards, or actually no need with this camera?
So we're supporting a CFexpress card and an SD card. So there'll be two different card slots in the camera. We're not speccing whether it's Type 4 or not, although I would say we don't need the extra data rate that a Type 4 card would benefit. The sensor can't read out faster or with enough resolution to require a faster card.
Talking about the sensor and the processor, according to your specifications, the sensor is new, but what about the processor?
So our processors always go through refinement periodically. So there are features and benefits in this engine that are not in existing LUMIX cameras. So it is our latest engine and implementation of that software.
You also mentioned recording in OpenGate, and that's one of the things that many people really like about the LUMIX cameras, that you offer this kind of OpenGate performance, so you can put anamorphic lenses and so on. But with this camera, you can shoot up to 6.4K, if I'm not mistaken, but you're also announcing at the same day that you also support 7.2 and 8.1K OpenGate recording. So first of all, why it's not kind of combined together in the release time, and when should we expect the firmware update to come?
Yeah, so to be clear, what's important to note is that the 6.4K originates from the 8.1K image. So it is oversampled. So it is giving you the full width and height of the sensor, no binning, line skipping, anything like that. At the end of the day, we did some testing and we found some challenges perhaps with some of the computers and GPUs on the market where they created some interesting after effects that we wanted to make sure our customers weren't going to have to experience. So we've been developing some workarounds, or at least researching to find workarounds for people. But we absolutely will do 8.1K. It was just a matter of making sure that we gave people a really good user experience when they first get the product. So 6.4K guarantees everybody's going to get a great experience. And then once we do that firmware update, if there's any workarounds needed for specific GPUs or computers, we'll make sure we report that out.
Here it's a real OpenGate in 8.1K.
When you see the term OpenGate from Panasonic, that'll always mean it's full width and full sensor height, or within a reasonable amount of crop. It might be at some points like a 1.1 or a 1.06, but in this case, it's no crop at all. It's completely and totally OpenGate. That's our line in the sand. If we're going to give you other options, like for example, we have a 4x3. That simulates the 4 Perforation Academy, or what people call 4Perf Academy. We offer that as a side option in the camera, but we would never call that OpenGate because it's windowing the sensor.
Matt, how about external recording through the HDMI or even USB-C to an SSD? Can you please highlight the resolution and frame rate?
Well, Johnny, for the HDMI output, you'll be able to record basically anything the camera's capable of right over the HDMI connection. So if you wanted to record 4K video, 24, 30, 60, we even support 120 frames per second if you have a recorder that's capable of doing it. The other thing is, though, we can even do 8K video over HDMI as well. Again, there are no recorders that can do that, but if you have a video capture card on a computer, you can record on a computer, or for live productions like, stadiums, churches, things like that, you can output 8K for those things. And then when you talk about the RAW capabilities, that'll be out in the future firmware, and that'll be up to 7.2K or 8.1K over HDMI for select recorders. And I believe we're working with both Blackmagic and Atomos for that. When it comes to the USB output for an SSD, There will be some limitations depending on if we are using the internal camera's battery or if we can do something around that battery. So using the camera's internal battery, you'll be able to record 4K video. In ProRes, you'll be able to do up to 30 frames per second. If you're using our MP4 options, you can go up to 4K or C4K at up to 120 frames per second. So that's all available to you with the internal battery. If you want 5.8K or you want 6.4K open gate or you want 8.1K, you'll need to do one of two things. And again, this only revolves around the SSD. This is not internal recording. But if we're using the SSD drive, if you use the BG2 battery grip, when you connect that to the camera, we can pull more voltage from the battery grip and then supplement it with a little bit of voltage inside the camera. And that gives us enough power to be able to power that SSD drive and do everything, including 8K video. So if you do the BG1, that'll give you one option. Another option, if you're going to be using like a V-mount or gold mount battery with a USB-C port, as long as that port is 9 volts, 3 amps, what you can do is you can pull out the camera battery inside the S1R2, put in the DCC18, which is a little battery eliminator. It goes in, gives you a little pigtail with a USB-C port, plug your battery into that, and then you will unlock all the recording functions that the camera is capable of when you use an SSD.
Matt, you also have a new picture photo style, and this is the Cinelike A2. What is it?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of the viewers and readers of CineD are going to be log shooters, and we understand that. But there are times where for live production, whether you're doing a live out into a multi-camera switching system, or you just need a really fast turnaround, that you just want a really nice looking internal baked-in color profile. So we originally had Cinelike D, which was our sort of variation on what we think a cinema look color profile should look like for live. We had Cinelike V, which is real crispy, super contrasty, very much a video look. We've managed to eke out just a touch more dynamic range with this Cinelike A profile, made some adjustments to the color channels, give you a little less magenta in the color rendering, so that we have just another option for a really nice looking deliverable for someone who wants to do something live.
Personally, I think sometimes the colors with Lumix cameras are a little bit too reddish. So if I can get rid of the magenta out of the box, I'm very happy here. Thank you.
Well, we could real-time, Johnny, we can real-time LUT. Yeah, you could just put whatever you want in that camera. You know that, right? Just pick your favorite LUT, just put it in there. You're ready to go.
Let me complain a little bit. Come on. Okay.
I understand, Johnny.
So this new camera has a dual ISO function. And in Vlog, what will be the native ISOs?
Okay, Johnny. So to be clear, I don't want to make any mistakes. So you're going to see my eyes drift down and look at a spreadsheet really quick here, just so the audience knows. But in Vlog, because we have the dynamic range expansion circuit, your log profile will change a little bit, whether you have DR expansion on or off. So with DR range expansion off, your low point, your native low point is going to be ISO 200, and then your high point will be ISO 1000. When you turn on the DR expansion circuit, your ISO is going to go to a low base of 400 and a high base of 2000. So again, just remember it's either 200 or 400, 1000 or 2000. So those would be your base ISOs for Vlog.
Very interesting. I mean, in Vlog, ISO 200, wow, that's very interesting.
Yes, I think a lot of people love having an ISO 200 option for a log profile.
You also have a new, what you call a dynamic range expansion. And you're rating the camera as what, 14 plus stops? So what is dynamic range expansion? This is the first time that I see this term.
Yeah, so effectively what dynamic range expansion is going to rely on is that if we need to run the sensor at a faster frame rate, dynamic range expansion needs to be turned off. You'll have about a stop less dynamic range. But that's when you're using 60 frame or 120 frame, or if you just want to reduce some of the rolling shutter of the output, that's when you would turn that function off. So you'll get better rolling shutter performance without it. You'll get faster frame rates without it. But if you need that extra full 14 stops of dynamic range, that's when the dynamic range expansion circuit is used. So, and this is an on-off option. The customer can choose it on their own.
So by default, it's off?
By default, it is off, yes, because we want to make sure everybody has access to all their frame rates and resolutions. It just helps to cut down on calls to the help desk when people find things that are grayed out and don't understand why.
We are very eager to test the results in our lab test and see if it's really 14 plus of dynamic range stops. Interesting, let's see.
And Johnny, one other note on this, it's not going to really impact the shadow region when you use this. It's almost exclusively on the highlight region where you'll notice it. So just in your testing, like I think your over-under tests, I think you'll find that it affects the over test much more than it's going to affect the under test.
Now, you're also emphasizing the capabilities of the image stabilization system, and we know that LUMIX was always doing great in this regard, but is there anything new here? Can you please elaborate?
So I think a lot of manufacturers treat stabilization like a checkbox, like we've got it. They don't necessarily care about the video side. I think they're more focused on the photo side. Panasonic's put a lot of emphasis on making sure we have the best video image stabilization on the market. It all starts with what we call Active IS, which is the software that we're using in the background to stabilize the image. And we've always had a feature called IS Boost or Boost IS, which is confusing. We always wanted to call it, no tripod mode, or you don't need a tripod, because it's for simulating a lockdown shot. Like this interview, you're on a tripod, but if this is only going to be a 2-minute interview, it'd probably take you longer to set up the tripod than it would be to do the interview. So being able to put it on that boost mode, knock the interview out really quick, then turn boost off to follow subjects around is how it was designed. Where we really made the impact and improvements, though, started with the S5 II. And 2X, when we incorporated our EIS algorithms. The number one thing we did there is we allowed the EIS to crop the sensor a little bit, which is what most companies do, is crop the sensor a little bit, and then they'll move on this sensor along with also moving the sensor. But what we did that was different is we recognized that when you're moving with wide-angle lenses, the background kind of wobbles, like the corners, like they walk, juggly kind of corners in the edges. And we finally determined what causes that. It's the fact that your wide lenses are only geometrically accurate when they're perfectly parallel to the ground. If you tip up or you tip down a little bit, like as you walk, well, the geometry of the buildings actually changes because of the lens. So what we're doing is we're actually geometrically correcting every frame of video. So if it starts here, it's now here. And that gets rid of all that sort of walking effect, but it requires a crop on the sensor. We have a standard, we have a high mode. High mode's like about a 1.4 crop. The other one's about a 1.2 crop. And when you use those things, the high mode's for running, the other mode's just for kind of walking. Well, what we've done now is we're actually going to use the unused region of the sensor. What a lot of people don't realize is the sensor's not 24 by 36, it's actually bigger than that. There's more pixels available to us. Because the LUMIX lenses throw a little bit bigger circle of light than we need for a 24 by 36 sensor, and because we know those lenses extremely well, we're able to get rid of some of the vignetting that would normally be caused, and then we can use that unused area, which means we now have a cropless EIS mode to prevent that walking building look that people have been complaining about for a long time. I think this is probably, outside of the EIS implementation we did last year, this is probably the second biggest improvement we've ever made for stabilization. And then on top of that, Johnny, I know you shoot anamorphic lenses periodically. I think I have an absolute love for anamorphic lenses. And we've always included the ability to optimize the stabilization for different squeeze ratios. But the problem is we had to turn off the roll axes. And like the yaw and the pitch axes, yaw and pitch axes, we had to really reduce their effectiveness when we were working with anamorphic lenses. Because of this new geometric correction option, you can now have a normal crop or a high setting. So you have two different EIS settings now when using anamorphic, and that gives us the range back again for roll and pitch and yaw. So you get excellent stabilization now also for anamorphic lenses.
You are very proud in the autofocus performance of the new camera. Why is that?
Well, I think first off, we were maybe a little slow to adapt to a PDAF autofocus system. I think we made huge strides by coming into this as late as we did to really close the gap between us and our competitors. But we recognized that there were some refinements that had to happen. So the biggest areas of refinement ultimately come in the functions for tracking and the functions for subject recognition, in particular for human recognition. So what we've gone to is a completely AI-based human recognition model. So for example, I'm not on an S1R right now as I'm recording this right now. If I turn this direction, the autofocus on this camera would lose my eye, and it would just go to like head detection. And then when I turn back, it would recognize the eye. The new algorithm will recognize I'm a person and I have a face and eye, and that if I turn sideways, it'll still recognize at least one eye. So you get more consistency there. It's less likely to kind of jump focus. And I talk with my hands a lot, as you've probably already been able to tell. If I bring my hands high enough into the framing, I don't know if I'll be able to fool this camera to make it do it or not. But if I move it far enough into the camera, sometimes the focus would move to my hands instead of staying on my face. That's been rectified as well. The biggest improvements also come when we're dealing with crowds of people. The ability to recognize that one specific subject, and then as that subject is, mingling within those people, not losing them and having it jump all over the place to other subjects. And so we feel like these are the areas we've made some of the biggest improvements. Ultimately, I think refining the system to where we're at least at parity with everybody in the marketplace, at least the top tier brands. And in some ways, we now think we've probably surpassed. So the goal here is to eventually at some point have the best in class autofocus system. And I think we're well on our way to being there.
Best in class autofocus, Matt.
That's our goal. That's our goal. Ultimately, Johnny, your reviewers, the customers will ultimately decide if we've gotten there. But we're constantly listening to that feedback loop. And I think people who've had an S5 II, or really any Lumix camera over the years, recognize that we're constantly making improvements and that we push those improvements over firmware. So if we still find some holes in the autofocus system that come to light, we're going to be very quick to react to make sure that we're addressing the market needs.
How about autofocus in high frame rate? Will it work?
So yeah, we can do autofocus up to 120 frames per second. The distinction here is that you will lose subject detection. So you can have it in either a 1 point or you can have it in the full area. And it does a very nice job of recognizing what you want to have in focus, but it does not have the ability to rely on that subject recognition algorithm to be able to do it. One other note too is that you may find at 120 frames per second that if you use the pixel for pixel option, so we have the full width, like a full frame, we have a full frame 120 frame option. We also offer a pixel for pixel, which is about a 2 crop. For some people, they may prefer the autofocus performance with that 2 crop over the full sensor width. And that primarily is just because we don't have to pixel bin when we do the 120 in the pixel per pixel option. So they may find the autofocus be a little bit better there.
Matt, you know what I don't see in the press release? I don't see any reference to the ARRI LogC3, which you kind of brought together with the GH7, and people with the GH6 were able to also buy the license for it. What happened to this?
Well, we're always in conversation with ARRI, and keep in mind, it's always a two-way street. Both parties have to agree that it's something that they want in the camera. I'm not involved in that level of product planning, so I don't know what the roadblock is. It could be that Panasonic is not ready to be able to implement it in the camera. It may be that ARRI is not yet comfortable having it in a camera like this. It's really difficult for me to be able to say. I think ARRI and that partnership on the GH7 will find a home eventually in a full frame camera. That's my hope. And so let's all keep our fingers crossed that we can either add it in the future or that some full frame camera down the road will be able to get it. But that's our hope, at least, is that at some point you'll get it in a full frame.
Thank you for being so open and transparent about this. Next topic is the hybrid zoom. This is a feature that you lately offered by like an update with a firmware update to some of your cameras. And in this camera, it's already exists. What is hybrid zoom for those who are not really familiar with this term?
Yeah, I love the hybrid zoom feature, in particular for video use. I think it's awesome because a lot of people are going to limit themselves to typically like 5.8K or 4K recording instead of going to 8K. So effectively what hybrid zoom allows you to do is if you're recording, let's say for argument's sake, we're going to do a 4K recording. As I adjust that zoom lens, as I zoom, what the camera will do is it'll start partially zooming the lens, but then at the same time, progressively cropping the sensor for you all at the same time. So if you had a 24-70, that would become a 24 to 140 millimeter equivalent reach. It's like putting a 2 times lens on the system itself to be able to magnify it. So it's just a nice, easy way to get extra zoom reach. Not everybody's gonna find it useful for every application, but I think for the vast majority of people, especially on the CineD audience, I think from run and gun use and for documentary use, this is a godsend for you to be able to have this particular functionality. And then we do also do something called crop zoom, which is primarily for prime lenses, not for zooms, where we can go ahead and progressively crop the sensor as a zoom function by using like the touch screen, the little slider on the touch screen.
You mentioned before that there is this knob for photo and video, like to change the applications, but you also said that now the menu has been revised and you will literally see, if you're in a video mode, and that's of course our interest in CineD, you will see less photo options. Now, I know from talking to different companies when we talk about menus, or this is very difficult for them to change the menu structure from whatever reason. What is your opinion? Was it really difficult for Panasonic also to change the structure here, or it was just, let's do it and that's it?
So Johnny, we did a lot of groundwork on this back with the introduction of the GH5 when we went to our tab-based menu system. Candidly speaking, menus were historically the realm of the Japanese engineer team, team in Japan. We've gone to a program where there's a lot more collaboration between the countries. And so that happened starting at the GH5, where we went to our more tab-based layout. We did a lot of surveying of our customers, along with people like me and other people throughout the world who use the product, to determine what features are really important to be in like a video or a photo tab, and then what features have substance for both communities. And so our photo and video tabs have always had features that were very specific to those categories. Whereas things like the ISO, whether it's a third of a stop or a full stop ISO setting, that was usually put into a third tab because it has ramifications for both use cases, right? And so we'd already done a lot of that work ahead of time. I think the challenge ultimately for us was just kind of moving away from how our systems existingly worked and kind of moving away from the fear of what our current customers would think if we got rid of that specific operation. And so to address the existing customer, you have the ability in the camera to set it up so that when you're in a video mode, you still have to go into the menu and have it set PAS&M, just like it does it on an existing like GH5 or an S5 II. If you want it to work that way, you can do that. And we've actually even added that functionality for photographers, so if they want to do that as well. So you can either have the new way that the camera operates, which I think most people will prefer, but we've added workflows so that people can still use it the old way if that's the way they prefer.
Thank you. You also mentioned earlier adding false color to the new camera, and I'm very thankful for that because of course that will help with judging exposure and so on in a very intuitive way. But what about the frame markers? Because the camera has this option, but did the new update, like you introduced lately for the S9 and for other full frame cameras, did it make it to this camera too?
I did not. Thank you, Johnny, for pointing out the flaw. I appreciate it. I'm just giving you a hard time.
It's an open, friendly conversation.
I know. Everybody, so I was begging for us to do the multi-frame markers for a long time. I was thrilled to see it happen in the S9. I'm thrilled it made it to the S5 II. For those of you who don't know what Johnny's talking about, you have the ability to put up to 3 frame markers simultaneously. So you can have a 16:9, you can have your 9:16, and then you can have like a 1:1. So you have all your deliverables already envisioned. You can move them around. You can change their sizes by pinching, things like that. So that's what Johnny's referencing. Look, I'm hopeful we'll see, obviously everybody already knows we have firmware update planned because we're going to be doing an open gate update. We're going to be adding that RAW over HDMI function. My hope, and I don't have confirmation of this, but my hope is that, it was a development limitation. We just had to get it out, get the camera out, and we didn't want perfection to be the enemy of good enough. So that's kind of what my hope was, is that that's why they did that, and that we'll eventually have it in a firmware update, and that's my hope.
Let's move to the kind of supportive part of the camera, and this is the apps that you have. Now you're also introducing Flow app. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yes, the Flow app. Yeah, so we have a lot of apps, Johnny. We have the LUMIX Tether app. So if you want to connect the camera via USB and control it on a computer, have up to 12 cameras, we have the Tether app. We have the LUMIX Lab app, so you can control the camera via your smartphone, import photos, transfer pictures, transfer LUTs, you're right about that. We're compatible with Capture One now, so you have the ability to use this for studio photography. And then the Flow app. So at its heart, what you can do is connect your smartphone to your camera via USB cable, and this turns it into a monitor. So your smartphone's now a monitor potentially, and you can use the touchscreen to, ISO, aperture settings, trigger, record. You can do that from the touchscreen if you'd like on your smartphone. But the Flow app's a lot more than this. We wanted a workflow tool, and so we looked at what was missing in the market, and we realized that a tool to help organize your shoot, making sure that you get every shot, and then ultimately speed up the editing process didn't exist. And so within Flow, what you have the ability to do is, aside from monitor, there's an option for workflow. And when we select workflow, what we would be able to do is we're going to tell the phone that we're either doing a scripted project, maybe it's like a music or dance video, that's the second option, or the third option would be a documentary. So once we do that, you would then have the ability to create your scene lists, right? So we have scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. Then below each scene, we have a shot list. So there might be 5 shots for scene 1. We can then take each shot and we can put information in for those shots. So for example, if you know how long the take should be, you can put it's a 2-minute take. If you know that the scene takes place in a big great room where there's a kitchen and a family room, maybe shot 1 is in the family room, while shot 2 would be in the kitchen. And then it's the blocking. How am I framing my subject? Is it a 2-shot waist up? So I can put that as a note. These are important for a future piece of information I'll share in a second. Once you have that information documented, you can then, if you want, you can put the entire script in there. And you can also put storyboards, and the app actually lets you design storyboards. So if you wanted to have actual storyboards to submit to your client to get approvals ahead of time, you can export a PDF of this entire particular project and send it off to them. So once we have all that information entered, when I select scene 1, shot 1, what you'll see is that multiple shots will light up yellow. And that means that they're all in the exact same location with the exact same blocking. So you can take those 3 shots and do them in sequence. You don't have to move from the living room back to the kitchen, then back to the living room. This helps to make a more efficient shooting experience. Once I've got all my shots done and I have everything finished, you want to have made sure that you entered it all in the order it's going to be edited. You want scene 1 to be first, shot 1 to be the first shot in scene 1. You want to make sure it's all in that proper order, because every time you hit record, when you end the recording, the file name of each recording is logged under those shots. And then from the app, you can literally give it a, hey, it's a thumbs up, it's a thumbs down, or it's just okay. So you can flag each of those takes. It'll then create an XML in the app, and then you can either put that in the phone and store it on the phone, or you can export it back down and put it on the memory card, which is where it should probably go because you're going to use that memory card. So take the memory card, put it into either DaVinci Resolve or into Premiere, launch that XML, all your data should come across, and you'll have all of those shots already organized in the library by scene and shot. You'll then have a timeline already built that has your first shot to the last shot already on the timeline with your best takes already kept on the timeline. And then you can trim them or make some evaluations if you need to take parts of shot 1 and add them to, parts of take 1, shot 1 and add it to parts of take 1, shot 2, whatever. So that gives you all of that flexibility. But the key here was to streamline your workflow and to make it a much more pleasurable experience to get really high quality results. That's a lot of information. Sorry, Johnny.
Again, I'm very, very curious to see how people will start to work with the app. By the way, will the app be available for downloading for Android and the iOS when the camera is out?
Yeah, so at launch, both iOS and Android apps should be available. And if you want to play with the app because you're thinking about maybe jumping ship and moving to LUMIX, you can use the app with your smartphone. Now, it's going to have some limitations like, it's not going to create XML files and things like that, but there is a smartphone experience within the app. So we think it's going to be great, especially for young filmmakers who are still doing stuff on TikTok and they're just kind of creating stuff in their phone. To teach people the proper workflow of production helps to get them excited about filmmaking. And so we think that giving us as a free option for people who are not yet camera owners will be a real benefit to the community as a whole.
Is it similar to what Blackmagic Design is doing with the Blackmagic Camera, or it's a bit different?
No, this is more the organization side of it, whereas the Blackmagic experience is more about creating a more manual camera experience with more flexibility with tools for monitoring, things like that. Very different sort of roles we're trying to fill.
Do you think that this app will be available for other cameras in the Lumix family line?
I hope it will at some point. I mean, I can already see where there's certain cameras in the ecosystem where younger filmmakers are probably more likely to gravitate to that camera versus the price point of the S1R2. So, I hope it's something we'll integrate into future cameras. I think we always have to look at the code in the cameras and determine if it's possible with that engine to be able to implement it.
Let's talk a little bit about audio. With the GH7, you introduced 32-bit float audio recording internally, but always with the XLR adapter that you have. And what about this camera? Will you also introduce the same here?
Yeah, so at Panasonic, we think that a great picture without sound is just surveillance. It's not really a movie without audio. So we're always focused on getting the best quality sound out of our products. Ultimately, the XLR2 development for the GH7 was always about more than just the GH7 camera. It was always going to be about these future cameras for us. So the S1R2 at launch will work with the XLR2. So you'll be able to get up to 4 channels of 32-bit float audio. So 2 of them come through XLR terminals, so XLR1, XLR2 with independent level controls. Not that level controls matter with 32-bit float, but we also give you a 3.5 millimeter jack, which adds an additional set of 2 channels, but there's only 1 level control for those 2 channels. So yep, it all works and it's beautiful. And frankly, since we've had the XLR2, this is probably the first time I've not used one in a very long time for this specific interview. I normally works in 32-bit all the time just for the safety of having it. And having it all pre-synced on your timeline just makes a much easier overall workflow experience.
Matt, what are actually the challenges to having the 32-bit float audio recording in the camera without the XLR adapter? Because at the end of the day, you are recording the audio eventually into the camera. Do you know if there's any technical issue here, or not necessarily with the Lumix cameras, but I'm asking in general, why not to skip the XLR adapter?
Well, I mean, we can probably fit it in. It's just a matter of how much bigger you want to make your camera. So clearly we could always build that stuff into the camera, but the challenges come into, number one, XLR terminals, things like that get bigger. The camera body has to get bigger. But let's say for argument's sake, we just wanted to implement a 2-channel 32-bit internal using a 3.5 millimeter jack. At its heart, you'd have to have 2 preamp stages now. Because you have to have one for the low gain capture and one for the high gain capture. So you're having to fundamentally double electronics that are in the analog stage in the camera, which that tends to get bigger. And then there's also thermal considerations that have to be taken into account. And then ultimately the engine would have to be able to write it. So there has to be some sort of an encoder that happens there. So remember, we're doing the encoding in 32-bit in the actual XLR2 itself, and then we're just injecting that data stream. So injecting the data stream becomes pretty simple. You just have to allow the camera to be able to accept that data stream. So a couple of lines of code. I'm sure it's more complicated than that. I know our engineers are rolling their eyes right now as I say that, but getting it into the camera is going to be much more complicated. It's going to require a lot more components to be added. And then ultimately, I don't know if the engine would be able to encode in 32-bit float. So that's where that extra encoding would have to come into play. So, bigger camera, we can probably make it happen. It's just the market wouldn't like the camera to be a lot bigger. That's why the S1R2 is about 220 grams lighter than the original S1R.
With so many features or new features in this camera, can you please pick one feature which is really your favorite?
My absolute favorite feature on the camera is the dual articulation we have. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with like our GH7 or the S1H, where you could flip the screen out or you could flip it out this way, right? But the problem is you couldn't flip it down. So if you had to hold the camera over your head, you wouldn't be able to look at it. And it was a pretty bulky, bigger mechanism. The new articulation's beautiful. So you have the ability now to pull the screen further away from the camera body, but it's a slimmer overall design. So when it's stored, it's much smaller camera overall. I can tip it down, I can tip it up. It really is great because I do hybrid work. I do photo and I do video. And on the photo side, and frankly for a lot of my video work, I'd much rather have the monitor behind. So for me, that screen implementation is my favorite, but there's an addition to that. In the camera's menu, you can also reorient the screen. So if I want to flip the screen upside down or I want to flip it to mirror, you can do all of that with it as well. So I consider that all one suite of benefits. The ability to be able to flip the screen wherever you want it, but then also digitally flip the screen in any orientation that you might need it. So if you're having to mount the camera upside down for an application, you could still right side up the screen.
Now, the camera will cost $3,300 US. With which other cameras are you actually competing?
So we never really want to talk about our competitors' cameras. I think there's some clear examples, in that $4,000-ish range that have roughly 45 megapixels. I think that's probably our target market, or at least the competitors who are going to be most likely compared to us. And again, the key is the 45 megapixel-ish resolution. Obviously, there are some sensors that have higher resolution than this. The challenge there is that they just don't have a fast enough readout speed. And so that's why we made the decision to go with this particular sensor.
Will the camera be available right at the announcement date?
So I wish we could do that. We can't have it ready quite at announcement date. So, but it should be available in March. I mean, fingers crossed, we should have it out with well under 30 days. I mean, it'll be probably within 2 to 3 weeks.
A tricky question. Should we expect
Sure.
Additional cameras from LUMIX this year?
Johnny, this is it. We're done. No more cameras ever again. Panasonic, we're closing shop. No, of course, we're absolutely working on future cameras. There will be more stuff coming. I don't want to tip our hand too much about timelines, but I think people will be very happy with what they see coming from Panasonic throughout the coming years. So without question, we're going to make everybody, I think, very happy when we can be more transparent about our future roadmap.
Before I say thank you and goodbye, anything else that I forgot to ask or you would like to highlight about the new S1R2?
I think the one thing that I want to make sure I highlight for people is just that it's not just a video camera, and that we have addressed some of the photo concerns people have had in the past. We now have 40 frame per second burst with a blackout-free viewfinder. We've gone to a full 10 frame per second mechanical shutter. We've even addressed the functionality of how the live view works, or the constant preview works when you autofocus, where it no longer gets bright and dark. So the criticisms that people have given to Panasonic photo cameras have been completely addressed in this particular camera. And then we also have photo features that our competitors don't have, like an in-camera high-resolution shot function, the ability to do live view composite function, which can create really long exposures without having to use really long exposures in the camera. And then for your community, I still think we have the best time-lapse function in the industry, not just the slow and quick time-lapse function, but an actual proper intervalometer with one of the easiest calculators that's ever been used for calculating your time-lapse. You frankly just say, how long do you want your video clip to be? How long are you going to be here? And it'll tell you how many frames you need. So it just makes it very simple, and it's very powerful. Our time-lapse, I still think, is the reference standard that all other companies should be comparing against. And so don't sleep on this camera as a photo camera. It's an awesome photo camera.
To hybrid or not to hybrid? That's the question?
I think the S1R2 is the answer, actually. That would be the answer to the hybrid question.
Matt, thank you, really. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Guys, thank you very much for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.